Welcome back. In this video, we'll go through a few examples to deepen our understanding of hydrostatic pressure and Archimedes' principle. Before we dive in, I recommend watching my previous video where I explain the concepts in detail. However, if you're already familiar with them, feel free to continue with this one. Let's start with a simple example to understand the concept. We have a cube floating between two different liquids. The densities of the liquids are given as rho sub 1 and rho sub 2, while the cube has a density rho and a total height h. We'll figure out how much of the cube is submerged in each liquid when it's perfectly balanced between them. In this case, all we know about the cube is its height, so we'll assume its cross-sectional area is A, to keep things simple. What we're trying to figure out is how deeply the cube sinks into each of the two liquids. Let's call the depth in the top liquid h sub 1 and the depth in the bottom liquid h sub 2. Using the densities of the two liquids and the total height h of the cube, we'll work out expressions for h sub 1 and h sub 2. We'll begin by setting up an equation that shows how the object stays balanced, with its weight pulling it down and the buoyant forces from the two liquids pushing it up. Now here's something key. Even though the yellow liquid is above the object, it still helps to push the object upward. That's because what really matters is how much of the object is submerged and the density of the liquid, not whether it's on top or below. Only the upward buoyant force affects the object's position. You've probably noticed that the weight of the object and both buoyant forces all act along the same straight line. They're all vertical. But here's something important. The buoyant force from each liquid doesn't act from the center of the cube. Instead, it comes from the center of the part that's submerged in each liquid. The weight of the object, though, acts from its own center, the middle of the cube. This detail becomes important later when we talk about how stable floating or submerged objects are. But for this example, we don't need to worry about where exactly the forces act. Just knowing how big they are is enough to solve the problem. All right, with that brief explanation out of the way, let's return to finding how deeply the object is submerged in each of the two liquids. To figure this out, we need to look at the forces acting on the object that keep it suspended between the two liquids. The upward forces come from the buoyant force exerted by each liquid, and the downward force is the weight of the object. These forces are balanced. That's what keeps the object in equilibrium. We can now write an equation that represents this balance of forces. Now we can replace the buoyant forces with the weights of the volumes of liquid displaced and express the object's mass using its density and volume. Since the cross-sectional area and gravitational acceleration appear on both sides of the equation, we can cancel them out to simplify the expression. Now we're left with an equation that includes only the given quantities. Since the object is fully submerged between the two liquids, we know that the sum of the two submerged depths, h1 and h2, is equal to the total height of the object, h. Using this relationship, we can substitute one height in terms of the other and rearrange the equation to find separate expressions for h1 and h2. One important thing to note is that the density rho 1 is less than rho 2. Because of this, we need to make a small adjustment to the expression for h to reflect the physical situation accurately. We can now substitute the value we found for h1 into the second equation to calculate the height h2. Now that we've figured out the values of h1 and h2, let me throw a question your way, and feel free to leave your answer in the comments. Suppose we remove the top liquid with density rho 1. What do you think will happen to the object? Will it sink all the way to the bottom? Will it rise a bit? Or will it settle slightly lower than before? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. Before we continue, I'd like to kindly ask you to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. Your support truly means a lot. Thank you. Now, let's get back to the video. Let's work through another example. Picture a reservoir with water filled to a depth of 5 meters. At the base, there's a gate that's 2 meters tall and 10 meters wide, holding back the water. We're going to calculate two things: the total hydrostatic force acting on the gate, and the distance from the hinge to the point where this force acts. That is, the line of action of the resultant force. In fluids, pressure increases with depth due to the weight of the liquid above. This means that the deeper you go, the greater the pressure becomes. Since force is directly proportional to pressure, the force acting on any submerged surface, such as the face of a wall or gate, also increases with depth. Near the surface of the water, the pressure is minimal. Assuming atmospheric pressure is negligible, the force acting on the wall at the very top is nearly zero. However, as we move deeper, the pressure increases linearly with depth, causing the force on the wall, including the gate, to rise steadily from top to bottom. We can illustrate this variation in pressure using a set of arrows drawn perpendicular to the wall and gate. These arrows are shorter at the top and gradually become longer toward the bottom, showing how the force increases with depth. This pattern is referred to as the pressure distribution across the submerged surface. It's important to note that the force at any point on the surface always acts perpendicular to it. Understanding this pressure distribution is essential when calculating the total force on the structure and pinpointing the center of pressure, the specific point where the overall force can be considered to act. The force on the gate corresponds to the portion of the pressure distribution that acts perpendicular to its surface, as illustrated here. To calculate the total or resultant force acting on the gate, we usually need to use calculus. But don't worry, I'll show you a simpler method later that doesn't involve any calculus. Let's first consider a thin horizontal strip of the gate at a depth of h meters from the surface. At this depth, the pressure can be calculated using the formula ρgh, assuming the fluid has a uniform density ρ. Now imagine this thin strip has a very small height, say delta h. Because it's so narrow, the pressure across the strip can be considered uniform. The force acting on this strip is simply the pressure at that depth multiplied by its area. Since the area is the width of the gate W times delta h, we get delta F equals to ρgh times W times delta h. To find the total force acting over the full height of the gate, we add up the forces on all such small strips from top to bottom. This summation becomes an integral over the vertical span of the gate, in this case, from 3 meters to 5 meters depth, since the gate is 2 meters high and located at the bottom of a 5-meter deep reservoir. Let's continue using H1 and H2 for now, because I want to walk you through an easier method to calculate the total force without using calculus. The integration gives us a formula for the total force exerted by the water on the gate. Let's now substitute the values for H1 and H2 into our expression and carry out the integration. This process effectively adds up all the small force contributions from each horizontal strip across the gate's height, giving us the total force exerted by the water. When we simplify the final result, it neatly breaks down into 3 key parts. The term ρg stands for the weight per unit volume of water. The second part tells you how deep the center of the gate is below the surface. And the last part gives the surface area of the gate that's in contact with the water. Combined, these give us the total hydrostatic force acting on the gate. Using this simplified method, we can now substitute the given values and calculate the result. The total force exerted by the water on the gate comes out to 784 kilonewtons. I know, now you are wondering whether this method can be applied to all shapes of gates. Well, you need to check that in my next video, where I discuss the pressure applied on different geometries submerged in liquids. Now, let's determine the depth at which this resultant force acts. In this video, I won't go into too much detail about calculating the distance to the resultant force from the hinge, but in upcoming videos, we'll explore a general method that works for any shape. Let's now focus solely on the gate and illustrate the pressure distribution along its surface. The simplest way to solve this problem is to break the pressure distribution on the gate into two parts: a rectangular distributed load and a triangular distributed load. The rectangular load represents the uniform pressure at the top of the gate, and its resultant force, F1, acts at the center of this section. The triangular load represents the linearly increasing pressure with depth, and its resultant force, F2, acts at a point 2/3 of the way down from the top of the triangle or 1/3 from its base. To find F1, we multiply the average pressure acting over the rectangular section by the corresponding area of the gate. This gives us a force of 588 kilonewtons. Next, to calculate F2, which comes from the triangular pressure distribution, we again use the average pressure, but this time it's based on the pressure at the midpoint of the triangle, since pressure increases linearly with depth. Multiplying this by the area of the triangular section of the gate gives us a force of 196 kilonewtons. By summing the two forces, F1 and F2, we obtain the total or net force acting on the gate, and this matches the result we derived earlier using the integral method. To find where the net force acts on the gate, we use the principle of moments by taking moments about the top hinge. This means calculating the turning effect of each force F1 and F2 with respect to the hinge. By balancing these moments, we can determine the exact location, denoted as h bar, which is the vertical distance from the hinge to the point where the resultant force effectively acts on the gate. This gives us a distance of 1.083 meters from the hinge to the point of application of the net force. That brings us to the end of this video. I hope everything we covered was clear and helpful in getting you started with the basics. I've included just two simple examples here to help familiarize you with the core concepts. A few areas were intentionally skipped to avoid an overload of information in one go. In my upcoming video, I'll walk you through more examples and explore a few additional concepts. So, stay tuned by hitting the subscribe button and tapping the bell icon. Your support and feedback mean a lot. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. It's a great way to let me know I'm on the right track. Until we meet again in another video, take care and goodbye.